This is the BBC.
Hello and welcome. It's another Confessions podcast from your friends at Radio 2. Oh, I've got some space here, have I? This is ID Wow Ramp. I could have spoken over this bit, but I didn't rehearse it.
88 to 91 FM.
Got there in the end.
BBC Radio 2.
So, this week's Concise Collection features Landing of Confusion, Smooth Operator, as a painful one that is, Flavour of the Old School, and Run Rabbit Run. Here they all come. Father Simon and the Underlings.
What?
Sorry, I'm just saying.
Yeah, this is going to go well.
This is from
It's
Richard.
all right.
Richard.
Well, my guess is that you're not.
Not forgiven, already writing it down. Yeah.
Actually,
It's true.
I think you're probably right. After many years of working within the industry, Father Simon, I feel it's time to confess something from my cabin crew days that has sat heavily on my guilty heart for a long time. As I'm sure you know, us cabin crew are on aeroplanes for a lot more than simply serving drinks and snacks. We're highly trained in many aspects of safety and can put out fires, break up fights, save your life, deliver babies, and of course, should the worst happen, get you evacuated from an aircraft that finds itself in an emergency situation. The training is intense and difficult. Many people fail. But those that make it through the grueling 7-week course eventually make it onto an aircraft to do their first ever flight with real-life, full fare paying, genuine passengers. However, the other thing to know is that when one joins an airline, there is an unwritten rule that the person should be initiated in a way that fully immerses them into the working world of trudging about on planes 6 days a week. One such day in 2006, I was the purser when we were taking an aircraft out to Rome, and we had a newbie on the crew, a 19-year-old girl, let's call her Alice, fresh-faced and smiley and brimming with enthusiasm. Perhaps she had a little bit too much enthusiasm. Some might say she was a little overconfident in her role. Shiny and new out of training, Alice thought she knew it all. No problem was too much for her to deal with, and she had an answer for every passenger and crew member on the aircraft. She knew the exact route, she knew the exact speed of the aircraft, she was far too aware of every minutiae of the service we were to deliver to our passengers. She was, to put it bluntly, really rather irritating. Now, the usual first aid pranks were pretty standard. We'd tell newbies that we were having a customs inspection on landing, so it was essential they should count every sugar sachet on board. We'd replace the safety demonstration life jacket with a real one, which would blow up instantly when they pulled the red toggle during the pre-flight briefing. We'd delicately balance a cup of water above their seat so that it would fall on them as the aircraft landed. I could go on, but they're all harmless fun. I knew, however, I'd have to get Alice with something special. And I concocted a plan with Simon, the captain, who was always up for a prank, much like Matt always is.
Oh,
He's
yes.
full of...
Already putting my black hat on for this one. Yeah, go on.
Now, normally on a short-haul flight, the pilots give us heads up over the PA when we have 10 minutes to landing, so we can start to prepare the aircraft. However, on this occasion, Captain Simon gave us 10 minutes to landing, and he gave the call 15 minutes to landing. Now, this was phase 1 of his evil scheme, and all the other crew knew exactly what was happening. Everyone except Alice. So we prepared the aircraft for landing as normal and then took our positions in the jump seats ready to land. However, we didn't land, we continued to fly. Alice looked confused in her seat, glanced at her watch, expecting to hear the aircraft gear lower, which would mean we had about 90 seconds to land. No such noise came. Playing my part, I popped into the flight deck, where all was well and normal, except the sly and deceitful smile on mine and Simon's face. Returning back into the passenger cabin, I walked hurriedly down to Alice's seat, and with a worried expression on my face, I explained to her that there was a problem with the landing gear. I told Alice that as the most junior member of the crew, we would need her to try and help dislodge it.
What?
She was to head to the middle of the aircraft, just behind the wings, in the middle of the aisle, and jump up and down in the middle of the cabin as hard as she could to try and dislodge the stuck landing gear. Now, obviously, in these situations, we didn't want to alarm the passengers, so if any one of them were to ask what she was doing, I told Alice to say, "These are my judo exercises that I like to do every day. You should try them once we've got back into the landing craft."
Once you're on ground,
That's the
perhaps.
one.
Yeah.
Alice looked horrified. The perfectly made-up face drained of colour and her overly smarmy demeanour vanished instantly. But clearly keen to save the day, she did as she was asked. She walked to the middle of the passenger cabin and, without saying a word, jumped up and down as forcibly as she could, stamping. Several passengers turned to see what was going on. Her hair fell loose from her perfectly coiffured donut. Sweat began to form on her foundation-stained brow. A good 30 seconds passed of Alice jumping up and down in the middle of the aisle, and still the gear hadn't dislodged. Meanwhile, the rest of the crew and I were hiding behind a curtain. The galley, that's where we were, crying with laughter and doubled over. A peek round the curtain a few seconds later showed Alice to be on her hands and knees, banging the airplane floor with her hands, screaming, "Come on! Come on!" This was far too much for us to bear. We collapsed into uncontrollable laughter. Thankfully, at that moment, Simon did lower the landing gear, and Alice, convinced she'd performed a truly heroic deed that had brought us all back from the brink of certain doom, began some mild hysterics, high-fiving passengers as she shakily returned to her seat. Her face was the epitome of relief and jubilation. Of course, the aircraft was fine. Our passengers disembarked. Alice took a moment to compose herself. So I seek forgiveness not from Alice, who still to this day has no idea that the whole thing was a massive prank. Nor do I seek forgiveness from the passengers, some of whom may have thought that the aircraft was staffed by a crew with a nervous disposition. And I seek forgiveness today from the engineers back at our base, who, when we landed back home that evening, had to replace the carpet in the aisle where Alice had made so many rips and tears from her incessant jumping and pounding. Now, I reckon I'm fairly attuned to the way these things are going to go.
Yeah.
So, and I already know that Matt doesn't like it just because he was referred to as an underling, which never goes down very well. Plus, I take a look at Bobby and I'm going, let me just take a look at Bobby now. Oh, Face of Thunder is what I'm looking at. Because I actually think Richard was slightly put out by how clever and smart Alice was and couldn't cope. Anyway, let's check in with Sister Bobby from the Priory.
Yeah, well, the thing is, work hijinks are a common thread through the confessions, and we love them generally. The thing is, you're on a plane, and that puts hijinks in a completely different situation, because you're in a plane, you're in a tin can in the air. So I'm really worried about hijinks when you're in a tin can in the air, regardless of the physics. The other thing I'm a little bit concerned about is, doesn't Alice know how her plane is put together? Doesn't she know that she's banging up and down on the wrong floor? That actually the floor of the cabin is not the floor of where the landing gear is. It's going to have a little impact. I'm more worried about why Alice is in charge of safety of all of us, actually. That concerns me. Richard, you are unforgiven. You don't mess around in planes.
Go on then, Matt.
Well, yes, I mean, I'm going to go along with Bobby on this. Number one, I think for this gag to work, the passengers needed to be in on it, because you're on this plane, and if I was on a plane and somebody started jumping up and down in the middle, I'd be a little perturbed. So in order for it to be funny, everyone else needs to be in on it as well as and not her. And also, landing gear obviously is at the front of the plane, and where else? It's on the wings, isn't it? It is on my toy one. Where else are anyway, the wheels are not in the middle of the plane. On the middle, underneath, and there's the cargo hold as well.
On the wings, normally.
On the wings, exactly. That's what I said. On the wings and at the front. So, for that reason, and also the underlings thing, I am not going to forgive.
BBC Radio 2.
Father Simon. You don't even get a look in.
Oh.
But at least he's not insulting like
No,
yesterday's
that's
no-hoper. Simon, let me take you back to 2003. When, having recently left the police force, my next challenge was to be an exciting new role as head of security for a very prestigious cruise liner. However, in the intervening months between leaving the police and starting my new job, I had to seek an income from any opportunities that should come my way. And I really do mean any opportunities. You see, I'd read in a newspaper that casting directors were on the lookout for tall males in their 30s who were athletic with smooth torsos. I should have said there's a little bit... Just remembered. I did write it on the thing here. But only
sorry
only
about that,
slightly.
Oh, really?
Just a hint.
Sounds like he's going to get saucy.
No, it's not at all, actually. The successful candidate would feature in an advert for pain relief products, and as I matched the age and height requirement, and was certainly in shape, my interest was piqued. The only problem was that my chest was thickly matted in dark brown hair, which was not the smooth torso described in the casting call. However, this was something I was more than willing to overcome for the sake of the £16,000 fee on offer.
What?
Well, you would, wouldn't you, really?
16 grand?
16
Yeah,
grand.
too
Yeah,
right.
you would shave your
Yeah.
chest for that. So to the casting. And once in the room, a man and a woman thanked me for coming, handed me a piece of paper with a number written on it, and asked me to take my shirt off and sit on the stool facing the camera. I proudly peeled off my shirt, revealing my recently gym-enhanced torso, which, thanks to a razor shave the night before, was now all smooth and shiny. Straining to ensure I showed off my physique in its best light, I held the number in front of me. What are you laughing at?
Straining.
Well, you know, it's the way you have to hold yourself, isn't it? Right. While the photographer quickly snapped a single shot. Then came the words that I hadn't for one moment considered hearing, as the blade of my razor had removed the final remnants of my much-admired chest hair only 24 hours before. Thanks for that. Now, could you turn round for a few shots, please? Well, I have to confess, Father Simon, I had failed to note when applying for the casting that it was in fact for back pain relief. So, as I turned to face the backdrop, I revealed to the casting team the same levels of manly hairiness that I had removed from my chest only hours before. Let's just say hairy backman did not get the job. No. I did not get the 16 grand.
No.
Now, fast forward to 6 weeks later, and I've just boarded the cruise ship that was to be my home for the next 3 months. With only an hour to unpack, shower, and change into my officer's whites, time was not on my side. I was due to meet my team and the thousands of crew and passengers for whom I wished to make the best impression possible, so I needed to get a move on. Having showered, I commenced to dress in my very Top Gun-esque uniform, including white shoes, white trousers, and very new and very starched, straight out of the packet, white short-sleeved shirt. I pulled the shirt on, and as if the stiffness itself wasn't enough to make my teeth grate, I felt the stubble of the now regrowing chest hair connect with the almost cardboard-like material of my shirt. The itchiness was unbearable, the inability to move in any way other than in robotic movements overpowering. It was then that I remembered that in the wardrobe of my cabin, the officer who I had replaced and who would be returning after 3 months had left 4 Egyptian fine cotton white shirts, each attached to a paper label with the words, "Please do not touch," attached. Well, such was my discomfort in knowing that he would never find out, I threw off my horrible new shirt and grabbed one of his fine garments that was truly silken to the touch. However, to ensure that more discomfort was well and truly avoided, I decided to dash back into the shower in the last minutes I had before being due on deck to shave my chest back to the baby smooth shine that I had subjected it to only 6 weeks before. Rushing to get the job done, I ran out of the shower, threw on the fine shirt, dashed out of my cabin door to find my way to the crew decks where I would meet my team. Within minutes, I would find myself in the full thrust of my new role, meeting and greeting passengers as they joined the ship at the start of the cruise, forming their first impression of the ship and its crew. During the frenzied couple of hours that followed, I was probably too busy to notice the looks that I must have inevitably got from passengers and crew alike. I met all of my team and at first didn't register the curiosity on their faces. That was until I happened to glance down and noticed 2 5-pence piece-sized circles of blood on the exquisite white shirt that I had borrowed only 2 hours before. I realised now that in my rush to shave my chest, I had obviously cut each of my nipples and...
What? Oh, that's even worse than I thought.
PG, it's just a PG.
Oh.
Caused them to bleed just a little bit. Rather embarrassed, I dashed back to my cabin in order to change back into the starched shirt that I had earlier rejected. And so it was that I was faced with the predicament of explaining to the owner of the shirt that I had borrowed and that I later found out to be worth in the region of £100 per shirt.
How much?
100 quid.
100 quid a shirt.
Finest Egyptian cotton.
Quality.
Feel the quality. If it rubs against your...
Yeah, thank you.
why it was I had ignored the signs saying do not touch and instead had worn one of his finest shirts, an admission that seemed inevitable since after at least 5 washes, the evidence of the blood stains was still there for everyone to see. However, Father Simon, it's not for the sake of the owner of the shirt that I seek forgiveness. Instead, it's from the cabin steward who I blamed for removing the shirt from the wardrobe and sending it to the laundry, where it was lost in the wash and never seen again, an event so rare on cruise ships to render the story almost but not quite unbelievable. Now, I realise that as an ex-police officer, I should know better than to use property that is not mine and without permission of the owner. However, it is the fact that I was desperate to present the best impression possible and not appear as some robotic maniac to my new team in my new career that I seek forgiveness from yourself and, in turn, from the cabin steward. It is one of those moments, I think. Certainly based on the expressions I'm looking at from Matthew and from Bobby. What do you say, Sister Bobby from the Priory?
Well, there's many of us ladies that graze the bit against above our ankles when we're doing our legs, and you go, oh, no, I've got it, and you try not to. So, yeah, it's a kind of similar kind of feeling. However, Rob, you're a policeman. You didn't borrow his shirt because you didn't ask him, so you didn't borrow it. You took it without his permission.
Well, he was planning to wash it and then put it back again.
Yeah, I know, but he still didn't get permission, did he? Also, I can't work out why he went back in to shave it again. It was only going to be... It's growing through the
stubbly,
yeah, but when it's the stubble going through the skin that makes it really prickly, so you're only going to make it worse. In a couple of days' time, it's going to grow back through. Also, I would forgive you, Rob, just about everything, except no one shaves their end bits. And you're a daft apeth, so you're not forgiven. Well, it's a PG, isn't it?
The what?
Well, you understand. It's a PG.
Anyway,
Anyway, move on.
It's almost like Nigel was in the room. Thank heavens it's not a Thursday.
That's the politest way I can say.
Yes. Okay.
Lovely.
Matthew.
Who spends £100 on a shirt? Ridiculous. Absolutely no shirt is worth £100. And if you're going to spend £100 on a shirt, you don't leave it in a wardrobe with a sign saying, don't touch my £100 shirt, because obviously someone is going to, and I would probably wear a shirt if I came across one that was being sold for £100. However...
If the shirt you were wearing was made of cardboard and it was chafing, you might be tempted
to, get a different shirt on.
Yes.
Maybe one that isn't made of cardboard. However, Rob seems to me like he wants to talk a little bit too much about his toned physique and his washboard stomach. And I was wearing my officer whites and I was looking so good. Well, no one's buying it, Rob. You took the shirt and should have paid for it. So for that reason, I am not going to forgive you.
Dear Father Simon, the Consider Collective and Contrary Matt. This shameful story takes place in the early 80s in a Yorkshire coastal town where actually there's a requirement for a Yorkshire accent, I'm afraid.
Oh, brilliant. Oh, I'll look forward to that one
In
then.
a Yorkshire coastal town where all the boys sported Kajagoo mullets and the girls cultivated their Kevin Keegan perms. I was in the sixth form when our headmaster announced there would be a special evening to celebrate the 50th anniversary of our school. He'd managed to elicit the attendance of Mr. R.M. Littlewood, MBE, an extremely eminent educationalist, and consequently wanted to impress him with the best show ever. Ever. The crux of the evening would be the presentation to Mr. Littlewood of an expensive, personalised plate from the local pottery and an amazing 50th anniversary cake baked by our domestic science teacher, Mrs. Tipping. Well, you can tell there's a couple of stories waiting to be told right here. Whilst the plate seemed an excellent idea, there was some anxiety about the cake. However, there was a general faith that all would turn out well on the special night. So the fateful day arrived with an excited, anticipatory feeling in the air. Bunting was going up, armies of cleaners were wiping and sweeping, and chairs and tables were being carried out of the assembly hall. Mrs. Tipping was beavering away on the cake, which seemed to be taking on Romanesque proportions, with sugared pillars emanating from a decidedly alcoholic fruitcake base. Amongst all this frenetic activity, myself and another sixth former, Steady Eddie, had been called to the head's office, and he delighted in telling Eddie and myself that we'd been selected to make the grand presentation to our esteemed guest. I was to say a few words and hand over the personalised plate, and then Steady Eddie would present the cake. He handed over a little speech that he'd written for me to memorise and then told us a reporter from the local newspaper had arrived and was waiting to take a photo of us. Under the sharp gaze of the deputy head and Mrs. Tipping, we posed for the photographer, Steady Eddie with the cake and me holding up the completely unique and very expensive personalised plate
I'm sure this is going to be fine. Yeah.
Within its ornate presentation box. The photographer was obviously having difficulty getting the plate in the picture because he kept asking me, "Tip it up, tip it up, tip it up, boy, tip." I was finally holding it at 90 degrees as the photographer took his last shot. Then the plate, graceful and swan-like, dove out of its box and hit the floor, smashing into millions of tiny little pieces. Mrs. Tipping screeched, and the fearsome deputy head vented several rather unprofessional expletives. Thankfully, that's why he or she was a deputy head, so you couldn't make that final step to being the head. Just an aside.
Okay.
Thankfully, the photographer kindly took a lot of the blame himself and promised a front-page photo to try and make up for the disaster. As the deputy head raced back to the pottery to try and replace the irreplaceable plate, Steady Eddie and I returned to the sixth form common room. Before long, the whole place was in uproars. They started to run a book on the chances of me repeating my smashing performance that evening, but unbeknownst to me, even worse was to come. When we all reconvened at school a few hours later, for the big presentation, I've never known a body of students exhibit such a complete state of manic anticipation. Every single student seemed to know what had happened, and even the staff were giving me thumbs-up signs and shouting, "Mind that plate, young fella," because they all said that in the 80s in Yorkshire. It had been very hard to memorise my speech given the concerns I had about keeping a piece of china between my hands, and I felt hot, sweaty, and under immense pressure. Finally, the time arrived, and Steady Eddie and I went backstage to collect the now completely bog-standard plate, as there'd been no time for any personalisation, and the amazing sculpted cake. It was covered in 50 candles, and myself and Eddie walked deliberately, slowly, across the length of the hall. During that walk, you could have heard a pin drop, and even the titters had been stilled as the sixth form drew a collective breath to see who would win the sweepstake. But, unbelievably, when I reached the stage, and the top... It's quite a stressful confession, this is. The top table, seating the headmaster, Mr. Littlewood MBE, the town mayor and other dignitaries, I managed to deliver the memorised speech and present the rather cheap-looking plate without breaking. I was so relieved to get this over and done with, I quickly and forcefully stepped back from the table, just as Steady Eddie was stepping forward to present the magnificent, turreted, shiningly lit 50th birthday cake.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I stepped back with enough vigour and close enough to Eddie's side to pull back the left side of his unfastened blazer. The blazer opened wide, his tie slipped out just as he leant over to deposit the cake on the table. Eddie's hauntingly memorable words were delivered in a broad Yorkshire accent.
Yes.
To the hushed masses of over 1,000 staff, students and parents, something like, "Bloomin' heck, me tie's on fire!" As the...
I didn't think you were going to do it.
I did.
Oh, superb.
I did.
Yes, you did.
I did. It was required. It's in the stage directions. Apologies if it was way off. As the flames... Basically, his tie's on fire.
Yes, we got that.
As the flames shot up his tie, not so Steady Eddie desperately raised his hands to start batting out the flames, consequently dropping the cake with all its turrets heavily onto the table. Far too delicate for such a clumsy delivery, the cake broke and the pillars fired off in all directions, but mostly forward onto the occupants of the top table. I don't have too much recollection of my hasty exit off stage, but I do remember seeing half the cake in Mr. Littlewood's lap, the frantic face of the headmaster with traces of marzipan over one eyebrow, and the slumped and wailing figure of a totally devastated Mrs. Tipping. I also recollect a series of sixth formers laid on the floor in uncontrollable hysterics, having quite literally fallen off their chairs with laughter. As you would. So from whom do I require forgiveness? Well, not from the head, as if he hadn't been so pretentious in the first place, I wouldn't have had the chance to ruin his evening. Neither from Mr. Littlewood, as at least he got a plate and half a cake out of it. No, it's Eddie's life that I ruined, as he hadn't realised it was my fault that his tie had been released, and so the flak was all his. Whilst my poor performance with the plate was completely forgotten in the ensuing cake gate backlash. Eddie got into trouble with the staff, his parents couldn't bring themselves to speak to him for weeks afterwards, and the ribbing he got from his fellow students, which included Eddie's photo in the local paper being defaced in the way that only school kids can, would have quite frankly broken anyone. I hope you feel magnanimous, says Slow Coach. Well, it was a bit of a disaster from start to finish, really. But anyway, Mr. Littlewood got his cake, and everyone was okay in the end. Sister Bobby, what do you make of that?
This is lovely. I love this. I was surprised, actually. I thought something else was going to happen. So, Slow Coach is really easy to forgive you because I don't see any of this was your fault. No one delivers a two-tier cake like that. You put it on a surface, you go, look, and here's the cake. You unveil it, or you do something. And also, you don't move a lighted cake either. It can be dangerous. So I don't think it's your fault.
Saying tip it up.
Well, yeah, the plate's not your fault. The cake's not your fault. I do feel sorry for Steady Eddie, who nearly caught on fire. I mean, that's really dangerous, so you've got to be careful. So really, it's easy to forgive you. This is not your fault.
Brother Matthew.
We are firmly in 70s sitcom land here, aren't we? This is very much Terry and June. I am going to forgive for two reasons. One is your accent, which was hilarious. And the other is that surely this is a design flaw in the tie. Ties shouldn't catch fire. Ties are always going to be near, like, you know, if you've got a birthday cake and you're wearing a tie, and you're probably wearing a tie if you've got a birthday cake, and it's going to have candles on it. So therefore, the tie shouldn't be flammable. So it's down to the tie. That's the reason why this has all happened. So I am going to
BBC Radio 2.
Father Simon and the Collective. My family are avid listeners to your show and often listen to the confessions whilst enjoying our evening meal together. I just wondering.
Now we know.
Well, no, I'm just wondering whether I should PG it.
Yes.
No, it's all right. It's okay.
Also, it's tea, isn't it? It's tea time, really. 5:30, if you're having it now. Tea.
What?
Evening meal, tea time.
What are you talking about?
Well, where I'm from, tea, supper.
It's not about where you're from. It's where Joseph is from.
Real
and
name,
Joseph says,
possibly.
enjoying our evening meal together. And the great thing about evening meal is
Could be any time.
covers everything.
Okay. Sorry.
Tea, dinner, lunch, whatever. This recently got me thinking. The key thing is they're all listening together.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, that's what's happening.
Eating.
This recently got me thinking about an incident some years ago when I was a detective working in the drug squad. Okay, so instantly,
Straight away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
aye, what's going on here? Young fella. In order to maintain my anonymity, I'll refer to the location of said incident as a Crown dependency in the British Isles, and hope this affords me sufficient protection from being identified. About 10 years ago, my team and I were investigating a local syndicate who were
Wow.
believed to be involved in the supply of controlled drugs.
We have gone on a different level.
So automatically,
Yeah.
you're thinking, okay, where is this going to take us?
Is there any food in it?
It's more like Crime Watch, really. Don't be scared. One particular day, information was received which suggested that two members of the syndicate, who lived in a small village, were in possession of a quantity of drugs at their address. I said this should be a PG. A search warrant was obtained, and a team of officers, including yours truly, were briefed and tasked with the search. There was no answer at the house when me and my fellow officers arrived, but entry was gained by using what is commonly known as the Big Red Key, which is essentially a heavy metal battering ram, which broke down the flimsy door without a problem. After establishing that nobody was in the house, there's no one in the house, Sarge. It's all clear.
That's what you do, is it?
Well done.
You're like
Go in the
Juliet
house,
Bravo,
Sarge.
you are.
Yeah.
Look out, it's the Rozzers. Yeah, we're the Rozzers. Get out.
Yeah.
Anyway, after establishing... A systematic search of the house was made, and I volunteered to search the small kitchen area. We're about to take a big left turn, by the way.
Oh.
When I went into the kitchen, I saw that there was a rabbit hutch on the floor. There you go.
Okay.
See? Which contained a rather nervous-looking rabbit. Curiously, another rabbit was wandering around the kitchen freely, completely freely, and I assumed that it had somehow escaped from the hutch, although it wasn't obvious how this could possibly have happened, as the door to the hutch appeared to be secure. Anyway, I got on with the search, and after a while the rabbit was starting to get under my feet just a little bit and be rather annoying, so I decided to return it to the hutch to avoid stepping on it or tripping over it. I opened the door to the hutch and put it inside with a nervous-looking rabbit who'd been there all along.
Now looking even more nervous. Yeah, go on.
I continued with the search. But a short time later, I heard a rapid knocking sound coming from the direction of the hutch.
Oh, yes.
I cast my eyes downwards and saw that the rabbit, which had previously been wandering around the kitchen freely, was now spending some serious quality time with the nervous-looking rabbit, which was now looking petrified.
Well, it is kissing day, isn't it? So
It is
it's very
for
relevant.
International Kissing Day. Because I was focused on the task in hand, a bit like I took little notice of the rabbits and just assumed that they were being rabbits,
Yeah.
which is, after all, true. When the search was completed, in the interest of ensuring things were left as we had found them, apart from the smashed-down door, I removed what I now realise was the male rabbit from the hutch and left him wandering around the kitchen again, which is what he'd been doing when we arrived. When later I thought about what had happened, I realised that the rabbits were being kept apart as presumably the owners didn't want any baby rabbits. Some weeks later, an informant reported to me that the owners were trying to give away a number of baby rabbits, but had been completely astonished about this because, as far as they were concerned, the rabbits hadn't had the opportunity to meet. What had happened was clearly scientifically impossible. I realised that it was my intervention that had led to this situation, and so I seek forgiveness for my failure to be honest and bring what had happened to the attention of the house occupants and suspected drug suppliers, who probably believed that some sort of miracle had taken place. However, in mitigation, a number of people ended up with lovely fluffy baby rabbits, which I'm sure made a number of children very happy. Oh, as a PS, says Joseph, no drugs were found during the search. Okay, well it's a clean kind of story.
Did he check the hutch? Just asking.
Well, I don't know. That's quite interesting because that would have been a very clever place. That maybe, I don't know, in with the sawdust.
That's why the rabbit was nervous.
Again, Bobby, you're straight to that. Is absolutely right. The nervousness was not because of Jack Rabbit joining,
was off his head.
joining the fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was because
Columbo.
Lady
Completely
Rabbit was
tripping.
hiding the drugs. Very clever. You're in the right. You should be like a
It's one day only. It won't last.
detective.
Yeah.
So what do you say then?
Well, first of all, Joseph, you had the safety of the original rabbit was your main concern. You didn't want to step on it. You didn't want to lose it. Let's put it back in its cage. It's obviously your lack of knowledge of animal husbandry that has brought this about. Because first of all, it's really annoying. You shouldn't have got involved. But then you're thinking, well, actually, you were trying to take care of the rabbit.
There were
You
bigger
didn't know.
issues. There were bigger issues.
There
that
were
he was
bigger
concerned
issues. It
about.
was your unfortunate rabbit ignorance that led to this. And if they did find good homes afterwards, then everything is okay. So on this occasion, you're forgiven.
He was just being a good copper, wasn't he? He was
Well,
just
yeah, I
thinking,
think
well,
so.
I need to just
Yeah.
make sure that I'm doing
He
my
didn't
job
lose the
properly.
rabbit. That would have been even worse. So on this occasion, you're forgiven.
Novice, Nigel.
Good. WPC Prior has a certain ring to it.
It was
doesn't
very- I
Yeah,
thought it
very
was
good.
rather
So, well, a lot of miracle conceptions, door broken down, no drugs found. I mean, there's a lot going on. But for the reason, I can't forgive you, Joseph, because you said me and my fellow officers.
I should be my fellow officers.
yeah,
and I.
and absolutely-
You've just a number of people are already texting at you.
Yeah, I bet they are. And it was just like, it's unlucky, isn't it? It was obviously they'd have thought they're having a bad day because someone smashed their door in, and also because they ended up with a pregnant rabbit. So a lot going on. But no, Joseph, because of your poor take on English, you're not forgiven.
I wonder if they actually tried to blame the broken door on the rabbit. That the rabbit was because it was a big rabbit and it was.
A very big rabbit.
And it was going around,
Yeah.
and it was getting more and more incensed.
Yes.
It was us. It was the rabbit that knocked your
Yes.
door
Gone very Watership down, very dark.
down. Brother Matthew.
Well, I think this confession falls into the category of what would we have done if we'd been in the same position. I have to say, if I'd been in a kitchen and there'd been a rabbit in a hutch and another rabbit getting under my feet and getting in the way, then I say, well, obviously the rabbit goes in the hutch. The dog goes in the kennel, the fish go in the bowl, and the rabbit goes in the hutch.
This is like
It's
a
very
life
much-
philosophy.
It is how the circle of life, once again, we see with the rabbit, is very much what their nature intended. So I would say definitely forgiven.
Well, they were this week's confessions. Who did you forgive? Send in your own dodgy story, please, to entertain the nation. Confessions at bbc.co.uk may be inspired by one of those tales. If you missed any of our drive time shows, you can listen back online, or you can download to your smartphone or tablet from the BBC iPlayer radio app. And what a lovely thing that is. On Monday, it was book club, John Marr's The One. And we found out about grown-up gap years. That's in there as well. Tuesday was a special Americana Tunes Day. David Bowie, Led Zeppelin, Don McLean and the Eagles for July the 4th. Wednesday, Sam Bourne, who is really Jonathan Friedland, joined us to talk about his new and rather topical book, which is called To Kill a President. And we found out everything that we never knew about the Glockenspiel, although our expert said Glockenspiel, so I'll stick with that. And Foodie Thursday, Nigel, spurred on by Wimbledon, made us a strawberry and white chocolate mousse cake. 1 portion and a half will do you for the whole week. If you made it to the end of last week's podcast, I asked you to tweet and get in touch. Would you stand by the pupil you think is most likely to go to prison first, which was like an invigilators thing? Thank you to Si and Barbie and Neris and Dottie and many more who did just that. This week's top secret code phrase is, I'm suffering from itchy chest double. Thank you so much.
88 tonight.